This year, we saw the first Seiya movie to go to movie theaters.
And again, it's kinda too lazy to be good, even though the animation is better.
But this is not a good representation of the Knights. This franchise was responsible for the anime boom we're still seeing today. I know that might not have been the case if you're not from Brazil, it is in many places, but the story was also mutilated in its English version to the point of looking like just some silly story.
And it seems this hasn't changed.
Getting the Robot has a video about how anime was treated as telenovelas in the rest of Latin America.
Caballeros del Zodiaco!
According to them, networks didn't think it was super interesting, but cheap enough to be placed in their programming.
They have interesting stories and dramatic revelations in common, if nothing else.
In Brazil, it was a bit different. Manchete, an old channel here, had no money and had low ratings when some toy came knocking trying to find a place where they could show the anime for their toy sales strategy. And they would have been turned away because their promo was something full of violence with no rationale, according to Eduardo Miranda, head of Manchete's cinema division.
Corta pulso, fura peito, tira coração, tira olho, não tinha uma história.
It's a gigantic saga, a holy war for the fate of humanity! And they refused because there was blood.
Yes, we still live in a world where parents don't know children shouldn't watch Sausage Party on HBO of all places. You know, the channel for adults. Nowadays, I wouldn't be surprised if someone thought Dragon Ball Z was the one to make anime popular in the country to the point of getting the first series more popularity as a side effect. But we had anime already, including some that were just considered cartoons, and are probably still remembered by those who watched them.
I don't remember a single person saying that The Little Prince was anime, and I guess nobody remembers Bob in a Bottle and Angel the Flower Girl.
And I think it's worth pointing out, this animation is beautiful. This is from 1986, started being broadcast in 1994 in Brazil, and it wasn't inferior to the cartoons of the time. It's no wonder so many liked it. But after Night, no longer looking for just cartoons for kids, the doors burst wide open. And we can probably buy figurines of Bikini Warriors. I mean, Seiya. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram.
Hi beautiful people and welcome to another feeling around the dark room that is my mind.
The first arc of Knights of the Zodiac, despite not being quite the same kind of story, serves as a great introduction to the franchise.
And if you have seen the story further, you know the series had a lot of plastic knights created to stretch it, and episodes where a third or more were just repeating the story.
The 15 episodes present the world in a more general way and establish how the series is going to work with its first villain without him overstaying his welcome. Knights always existed and no one knew, a MacGuffin to start the story, interest of the main character. Nothing very detailed, but it's an action-adventure series, so it works quite nicely.
Of course, there are some things that are really out of nowhere, but I do like the beginning of the story.
Even the main idea of the story, Seiya can overcome his limitations, it's pretty clear since forever. Seiya is presented as smaller, that is, physically inferior to Cassius, his first enemy, then being revealed he was capable, but also explaining the cosmos energy, the spiritual pressure, the key, you know, the soma of this universe, on top of showing what he'd do to Mike Tyson. In the same episode, we see the first fight against China.
And in Brazil, she was basically called China. Due to a number of mistranslations and a considerable lack of understanding,
it seemed that it's supposed to be Shiner, and this is a good example of how lazy translation can ruin a literary basis. Shiner refers to brightness, which relates to her constellation where the last supernova explosion had been seen, and also to her electric attacks. I did think it was a reference for a blue eye, maybe thinking of her mask, but the expression is not related to purple in English or Japanese as far as I know. Back to the story, when her status is revealed, this contributes plenty to how we see Seiya's skill. We still have the mistake of I need my cloth to do something, but maybe this is something they'd overcome eventually?
And that's one of the very few positives I would say about the Netflix show. If that was the idea, it's much clearer there.
Meanwhile, on the version by The introduction says who the main characters are and Seiya is the chosen one from the start. Practically every attack is cut so children won't see the most graphic parts, and everyone looks like they're sucking on these green or purple lifesavers. Seiya talks kinda stupidly and is more of a crybaby. The ear doesn't fall. And how did he suck candy with his ear? And Cosmo Energy is magical star energy coming from the stars. And this beautiful animation, besides being cut to pieces, is interconnected by horrible animations trying to improve the story they didn't want to tell, like Transformers Generation 2. They are continuous episodically, the second episode demonstrating strength and a little strategy, but still pretty basic. Seiya lets himself be caught by the Bear Knight's strong point, but shows some strategic thinking, even if it looks more like a matter of strength. Even so, there's still a lot of dramatic value. The only noticeable things are Seiya's motivation, to whom Mitsumasa Kido had promised he'd be able to see his sister again, Saori using that to convince him to enter the tournament, since it's going to be televised, the training Peter hates the most, this moment, which is never really explained, and another tiny little moment that I think has some impact. Oh, and a kick version of the Pegasus Meteor Punch, but that doesn't even get a name.
So I'll give it a name. Pegasus? Ryusashu!
Oh, and there's one more little detail. Athena seems to have some sadistic tendencies.
Is that why we have problems with every other god? Because our protector goddess likes to dom? And yes, I have seen that comic.
Meanwhile, in the version by Makoto is Seiya's best friend.
Am I your best friend?
Well, yeah.
The fights now have rules, the computers never lie, the bears were only sleeping, and no one explains there were multiple kicks. In fact, they suggest Bear Geki just lowered his guard. So as far as I know, in their version, it was just a kick. Oh, but Princess Sienna using Jab as a horsey, they kept. Cartoony but critical. We'll be back. The third basically does the same but for Hyuga.
Fire!
Saying where he's from, his freezing powers, and that status changes still exist. They just need to be stronger to count. The most noticeable thing, of course, is that Cygnus has a more closed-off personality. I mean, his code. But he's not evil towards Yakov, which followed his training as far as we know, and he worries a lot about his mother, who's preserved in the deep waters of Siberia inside the ship she was in.
If you didn't understand the parallels between anime and soap operas, here's a good example.
It's corny for sure, but it's understandable, unlike him crying white tears. Maybe his blood is full of aspirin? This doesn't bother me, but I'd say that, at least in the version we got here, this isn't as well developed as it might have been.
I would have been dishonest if I said that emotions are always well developed in Saint Seiya.
Seiya's lost sister reappears in conversation just occasionally, after being a motivation. Hyuga's mother will only have some real impact way ahead in the story, after the infamous talk about Camus being his master's master.
Meu mestre.
O seu mestre? O mestre do meu mestre.
O mestre do meu mestre. Mestre do meu mestre. Você é o mestre. Meu mestre contra o meu mestre. Seu pupilo e meu mestre. 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 Mestre, não morra. Mestre. Mestre. Pupilo.
Pupilo.
Meu mestre. Em os meus mestres.
Mestre do seu mestre. Meu pupilo. Pupilo.
Por favor, não diga mais nada.
Also known as, we created another character, so we have another action figure to sell and we can stretch the story. Even though I don't think he is the worst example of this.
The issue is that something so big wouldn't be so disposable, and if it isn't disposable, it wouldn't be so detached from the conversations. But again, it's an action series. It could have been better, but that doesn't make it bad. And I won't comment about Dick's version anymore, because I think I need a whole video to talk about how bad it is.
But Hyuga, the serious guy who is even able to rival the first villain of the series, he's just a stereotypical surfer dude.
Sorry if I kept you dudes waiting. I got here just as soon as I could, but it's a long walk from Siberia.
And his mother is just under a spell.
In the 4th and 5th, we have our first bigger story. After winning his first fight, Seiya has to fight against the Dragon Knight, who really seems incredibly capable, not just powerful. And, still in the I need my claw flaw, he has an infallible attack and the strongest shield in the world. and they did it better than you guys. Besides, we have a beautiful moment of fluidity for Phil here, plus a great emotional ending. We've had an underdog situation in each episode. Against Geki, Seiya seems a bit more careless and lets himself be in a bad situation, having to focus more to win. Against Cassius, Seiya looks inferior because of our perception of strength being wrong for this world, as Cassius's was.
It's almost as if the one who is Cassius were us.
But on the third, Hydra basically puts himself in the same position, thinking the poison would do, and doesn't get out of it. I suppose you could say he was leaning too much on the venom, and that's why he lost? But in practice, Yoga is just more powerful. He tanks the attacks, the poison is useless, and Diamond does. And seeing a knight lose just because the other is simply stronger contributes to the conflict in the following episodes. We have a real threat in Shiryu barely having to move his arm to defend sometimes, forcing Seiya to use strategy to even have a chance of winning, and you feel how different the two situations are. Shiryu's being stronger, more technically capable, more able to defend, and Seiya being persistent and intelligent enough to find his weak point, and that class in the second episode isn't directly addressed, but it helps. It's such a difficult fight that Seiya only wins after spilling enough blood for 3 or 4 blood banks, and he needs 2 brain surgeries by the end of it. I don't know how a doctor knows this with just a stethoscope.
My god! A third butt cheek!
And the end is simply wonderful. The tension is real, no character is acting weird, and you feel the joy when it's all over. It's a real moment of victory, and we have the first notion that something bigger is going to happen, with the appearance of Phoenix.
They mention him, I know.
No, you don't need to think a lot to know it's him, but here it works a lot better than in other places for a very simple reason.
No one explained who he is.
As I said in the top 5 worst first episodes of last year, when you present a mystery, you can't give the answer at the same time. Here, even knowing it be him, we have no information about him. And of course, him heading the Black Knights isn't mentioned until they are a threat. In the 6th episode, the friendship between Shiryu and Seiya starts being established with his visit to the hospital, and the dragon says having felt the presence of someone else during the fight, plus a little joke or two. I don't know why, I just like jokes about Seiya in the hospital. Meanwhile, Unicorn and Andromeda start their fight, with girls talking about how beautiful Shun is.
And before anything else, Shun is an androgynous stereotype, a bishonen. They are common in Japanese media.
If you saw it in Brazil, there was a girl called Mitsune presenting Knights of the Zodiac on Manchete, and you might have seen her say Andromeda looks like a woman because of his constellation.
How about Phoenix from Shurato? How about Kurama? Explain to me Yukito from Sakura Card Captors, go ahead!
No, I'm not blaming her. She definitely didn't write this, much less ask her vignette to be repeated so much.
Muita conspiração e paranoia.
But in case it hasn't become clear yet, this is an example of culture going against prejudice. It wasn't exactly genuine representation, of course, but without these we'd never have a made-up Jerry Lewis fighting karate on a tutu.
I know. But if it doesn't go into the mainstream, it doesn't get out of the niche.
This excuse of pretending Shun can't be gay always felt remarkably stupid to me. The issues associated to having a character like this aren't simple, like his appearance not necessarily expressing his sexuality for one. I mean, damn, an educational scientist had difficulty with that.
Good.
But Shun literally has a romance with an Amazon, faces various adversaries even not wanting to, and is not shown as weaker than the others despite that. He's a good representation.
Before Netflix hired Bubbles to unicorn him.
In his first fight, Andromeda barely needs to move to win, and his pacifist attitude seems legit, since he stays on the defensive, making no effort to attack. Hardly could someone call him inferior, like Wolf, Unicorn, or Bear, who seem to not have developed their powers as much as the others, and who only get better developed in Omega.
But that's the point. He is strong and not standard.
Back to the better thought out story, at the end of the 7th episode, Ikki has been revealed as the master of the Black Knights and take the Golden Cloth after defeating Unicorn and Wolf easily.
And so we have a villain, capable of darkening the projected skies and making the gold cloth come out of its box. In other words...
Presentation!
We'll be back. Suddenly, our heroes, all having been shown as capable, even if Andromeda less so, have to join together to fight a bigger enemy, having to defeat evil versions of themselves.
And I have to say, they make an interesting version of the evil twin and the power of friendship.
The 4 Heavenly Knights of Darkness, as the anime calls them, would have been the strongest amongst the Black Knights in the story, although it is going to be expanded to the point there are copies of cloths that hadn't been shown till then. This far, however, only the Phoenix cloth would have multiple copies. So it's just a
cosmic coinkydink
that they have cloths inspired on the same constellations. But despite being copies, they are presented as powerful enough to be a threat, Black Swan Jidou defeating Shun and being as strong as Hyoga in his first appearance. On top of that, they have an advantage, since Seiya doesn't have his cloth and Shiryu is in Jamiao trying to fix it. It'd be 3 against 5, and one of the 3 doesn't even have his equipment.
Oh, and there's another detail as well. Sorikido starts to give space to Athena.
It's a somewhat outdated execution, yes. Mitsumasa Kido shows up in what could have been a recorded hologram, but could also be an apparition, not that this is the problem, and reveals that the tournament would be a way to create a defense against an evil that was to come, but then he says she should be more ladylike.
The word he uses is onarashi, then saying she should use the kindness of a woman.
This is translated as gentleness and kindness, but there's no way of not seeing this as attached to a view of feminine as non-aggressive. The way this will come to be itself is not a problem. Saori goes to talk to Seiya and shows she cares more about him than the golden cloth. Without specifying anything, the anime demonstrates the importance of a leader caring for her soldiers, and this part works. It'd be better if the moral wasn't the same as the chess game from No Game No Life, but taking itself too seriously. However, it does work better than Athena against Abel. All of that, of course, after Saori visits him and sees him without a shirt on.
How scandalous!
In this beginning, Night has more humorous scenes, and this usually contributes quite a bit to how the spectator accepts the premises. In this same episode, Shiryu goes through a test to prepare for the Cloth Cemetery and meets Night skeletons that fight him.
And this would certainly feel a lot more ridiculous without the jokey tone in the beginning of the conversation between Seiya and Saori, or the joke in the hospital.
And more than that, he defeats the Halloweeny enemies with an attack that's never been seen that far, and I don't think he uses again, to then see that all attacks and movements he did to the sides were in a place with one single bridge hidden by the illusion and the mist. All of that on top of a tower without entrances, telekinesis, and Mu, a master capable of reviving cloths that requires his vitality to do so, and the existence of a mineral that the Brazilian translation doesn't even mention just to make it harder.
Damn! In the next episode, they go into a valley full of sulfur and bones. You don't even have to suspend disbelief, imagine that.
If this makes you think it's kinda silly, strap in. Seiya gets his cloth from Shiryu, who turns into a dragon in front of him. But this is different because the real Shiryu turned grey from losing so much blood, again. And Seiya finds Kiki when he moves the box for no reason. You know, Kiki, Mu's apprentice who has telekinesis and travel through teleportation to deliver the cloth? No, neither him nor Mu has illusion powers. But back to the story that's serious and literal, Pegasus is the first to fight his counterpart, in a fight that's not that good. The only things to say are that Ankoko Pegasus starts with that kick from the fight against Bear, and Seiya has no difficulty avoiding it and says his cloth is wonderful thanks to Shiryu, implying that need for the armor they're going to forget further ahead. And that in the last clash, the Black Pegasus meteors join together in one attack, which is not effective for its strength, but maybe you could say he had a version of the Pegasus Comet Fist before Seiya? The only part that's really relevant in the fight is that the black attack forces Seiya to wear blackface!
And somewhere someone is using this as an excuse to be racist.
In the same episode we have Hyoga defeating his counterpart with no difficulty, but Jidou has the ability to record his fight and send to Ikki? Yeah, the next episode starts with Cygnus being thrown back after his diamond dust was sent back on him because Black Swan revealed how it worked and then taking an illusion demon fist. But he gets up because the illusion just pissed him off, even taking Phoenix off the ground with his Aurora Thunder, to then fall back down right after, realizing he was exhausted, and that Ikki took off his cloth. And despite this making no sense, Ikki awesomely continues imposing even without any protection after Hyoga has his nerves overwhelmed by the Gamma Can, and we still get a moment of Cygnus freezing Ikki's arm before falling yet again, supposedly dead. Shiryu comes back and receives a jingle bell from Kiki, who was going to watch the battles, but I guess he gave up. The jingle bells were Shun's ideas, so they knew when it was one of them approaching and didn't attack. And that's how they find Seiya, who's trying to climb back up the mountain so he doesn't die. But Shun has to hold Seiya while Black Andromeda tortures him. And the Black Dragon arrives right after, in time to see that the Black Chains can become living serpents.
And this is far from being the most absurd thing Cosmos can create.
Seiya speaks through his cosmos,
which is something that would happen more than once.
And Shun gets mad, frees himself, and defeats Black Andromeda easily. Black Dragon says he'll defeat Shun, but Shiryu arrives and fights him, which is represented by a Black Dragon, which is joined by a Green Dragon. It's really a shame that this kind of image wouldn't happen that much further ahead. It's also interesting to see that the Black Dragon uses a powerful blast of wind, since we'd see this in the future, even if from a character that's exclusive to the anime. That fierce tiger gale might have been created for TV, but the connection between tiger and dragon is canon since forever, and this may suggest this was the idea from the start. And as Shiryu bleeds during the fight without being hit, maybe this means he's using the movements to attack with the wind made by them, like Asuma with those chakra blades in Naruto. On top of that, since Shiryu just came back from the biggest blood donation in the world, and there wasn't even a cookie afterwards, he was somewhat fearful and is cornered by the power of the Black Dragon with some ease.
Yeah, the Rising Dragon Lord would make him bleed more, because apparently it makes the blood flow backwards like the waterfall. At least for this episode.
Which leads to another great image of the dragon crying blood tears right after Shiryu takes off his cloth again, possibly to indicate his life is in danger like the Galaxian Wars, but I'll make this joke anyways. Do you want me to blind myself? I can! Or you can paint it all blue and pretend they are energy lines made of the foamy water from Kame Sennin. Now it's much better. So, defeating the dragon falls onto a huge pool of his own blood that'd be enough to resurrect Rasputin. Not that one. Ready to return to redying until the Black Dragon reappears, and while he prepares to get a fifth of the fierce tiger's gale, he closes his eyes, to then be hit by an attack that stops his bleeding, and it's all good. I bet a vampire would find this so wasteful, and the black blood is probably disgusting.
I mean, am I being an asshole?
All of that because Black Dragon decides he believes in the power of friendship, since Shiryu implies that Seiya is like a brother to him.
Heck, he was.
I do get curious as how this was done in the manga. There, not only the Bronze Knights were half-brothers, the Black Dragon had a twin too, so it might have worked better with him having feelings for his brother. Anyways, we need someone to save Seiya from his blackface forced onto him, so he can once again be... Yes, right after we see Pai Mei's attack can be used to stop bleeding, we see that a poison that spreads through the whole body can be reversed if it is bled from the points equivalent to one's constellation.
And they're going to use this again later. And I know that I should find this contrived, but I don't really think it's that bad.
Maybe it's because it continues with the parallelism between Pegasus and Dragon, with Seiya now weak for losing blood as he did, and having been saved by him like Seiya saved him before. Or maybe it is because it feels like another part of the same mythology, since blood is used to fix the cloths. I don't know, it just works.
It's a bird! It's a plane! No, it's a commercial.
Finally, Shiryu and Shun reach Phoenix and... Yep, the guy everyone thinks is inferior is a great example of strength and emotional complexity, even if choosing not to fight. And so, he says he'll give his life as a sacrifice to stop the fighting.
Okay, this part really makes no sense.
The idea seems to be that he is making himself into Andromeda, but the rest of the situation doesn't suggest this could work, so it's just a character flaw. I don't think it ruins the rest of it, but I'll explain it in a bit. Hyoga reappears, ready for the Demon Fist, with mirror force coming from his heart, as we've never seen before and will never see again.
I did say this part got kinda silly, didn't I?
Ikki sees his Black Knights turning against him, meanwhile Cygnus intends to defeat him to stop the fight, being stopped by Shun. Long enough for Ikki to wake up and attack him on the same spot for the third time.
Which makes me think Ikki is the Savage Dragon of the Knights? And maybe Cygnus is an alien?
That's my other heart.
And then realizing Hyoga's rosary was what saved him from being killed. Which suggests he aimed the rosary as a shield? Seiya had also joined them, but they are all defeated by a single phoenix wings, so powerful that it changes the color of Swan. However, the golden cloth appears to protect Seiya, and he's even able to destroy the phoenix cloth, but it reappears, which is another interesting point.
Seiya literally says Ikki is in his last moments, so this all can be just a rite of passage, so he would be reborn closer to what he was.
Everyone jokes about how enemies become allies in anime, but this might be the best representation of what this really means. While most shonen is exploring the story of warriors in general, this trope explores the nature of a ronin. If a samurai is a warrior trained to defend and attack, one of the most problematic aspects of martial arts is the need for a purpose. If such a warrior has no purpose, be it because his master threw him out, or because he died, or because of isotope 322, there'd be no reason for their existence, making them feel pointless. At the same time, we have Hyuga making him go through a nightmare like the ones he caused, and Shun trying to sacrifice himself, both to end the battles. What does the trick, however, is Seiya continuing to attack. There's a touch of, the golden cloth has picked me, so I won, but there's a better explanation if you know the series.
Not that this is said in any place, but I think it makes sense if you think about the disappearance of the golden cloth that's going to happen further ahead.
After this arc, the series continues with the battle between Athena's knights and the one sent by the sanctuary, never ending because Athena was able to keep one of the parts of the golden cloth, until a certain point when the cloth parts just disappear. Up to this point, no one had spoken about the cloth choosing their knights, but I believe that's the reason. First, because the golden cloth comes out when Ikki shows up for the first time, and this far, it hadn't done anything but protecting Seiya. At the same time, Ikki has a subtle change in attitude. While he's losing for a moment, he just says Seiya is inferior and his armor is undone. When the cloth remakes itself, he defends himself a different way and says he has renewed energy. In other words, Seiya defeated the Ikki that stole the cloth and cares only about being strong, Sagittarius recognizing his skills. That's not enough to defeat Phoenix since he's immortal, but Seiya is helped by the cosmos of the others, getting parts from their cloths and the diamond dust to defeat Ikki after he hits F5. It also contributes to keep this idea that Ikki keeps fighting even after admitting he's defeated, as if he had trouble controlling himself, and there are no lack of reasons. On top of that, the hatred caused onto Ikki is called a second life by his master. This can be seen as a form of mind control by trauma, forcing him to reject any kind of cooperation not caused by the same hatred.
In other words, Sagittarius had chosen Ikki for being the strongest, but then chooses for Seiya because he's able to accumulate everybody's cosmos and persevere against the strength of Ikki.
Of course, there's also the intention to contrast Shun's pacifist attitude and payback attitude from Hyuga, as well as Ikki's being ready to cause whatever damage is needed to get his objectives, with Seiya's, who perseveres and brings with him the will of all to defend what he thinks is correct. But that's pretty obvious, with the victory by the power of friendship.
So this is the power of friendship.
There's also a smidge of destiny that's well used here. While reading the stars in Omega was too on the nose and poorly done, here you can read that the Golden Cloth has a notion that Athena will be threatened and is looking for a warrior that could protect her. And we know Seiya's ability to join the other's cosmos into himself would be very useful. Well, we go through Ikki remembering his story, where we have the extremely complicated relationship with Esmeralda. Look, this video is already pretty long. I'll talk about this in the next one. It's going to fit better there. And so we have the first of the Plastic Knights, Socrates, which steals most of the golden cloth while Ikki throws Seiya the helmet. And here's where I stop. Knights would become an epic saga, as I mentioned, so we'll certainly come back to visit it. I'd love to talk about all the Plastic Knights, either working or not, about the immense powers of gold and their consequences further ahead, or even about what came afterwards. It was quite fun rewatching this beginning. It really works well, even with the ghosts along the way, and in Jamiel.
But everything has to end at some point, and we have work ahead of us.
And if you enjoyed it, hit the bell.
can't stay here. I'm going to record right now. Lack of understanding. Go ahead. Explain to me Yukito for sucker. I don't know why I say for.
Seiya lets himself be caught by the... with just a stethoscope. With just a stethoscope.